You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Sarah Gulseth.
I'm Andy Bates.
Thanks to Concordia University, Wisconsin for your support of The Coffee Hour. You can find out more about Concordia University, Wisconsin at cutfw.edu.
Live uncommon.
Today we get to go over to our friends in Fort Wayne and talk about the very quickly upcoming Good Shepherd Institute happening at Concordia Theological Seminary coming up this weekend. So joining us today is Kantor Kevin Hildebrand, Kantor at Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So the Good Shepherd Institute is coming up this weekend, Sunday, November 6th through Tuesday, November 8th. Before we talk about what's going to be happening this year, can you give us kind of the background of the Good Shepherd Institute and what this event is?
Sure. I like to describe this conference as sort of our think tank for sacred music and pastoral theology, and as a way to provide research, information, and resources for pastors and church musicians to help inform and encourage and enliven the song of the church in their own parishes. It was started in the year 2000 by our predecessors, Cantor Richard Resch and Dr. Arthur Just, as a way of encouraging this sort of conversation and collegiality also between pastors and church musicians and other church leaders, congregation leaders, to help give them tools and resources and things to think about, things to talk about, and also a place to go to be refreshed, to be taught, to be nurtured in all these things that pertain to singing the faith and confessing the faith as we do it. And so this is our 23rd annual conference, and we're always looking forward to sharing the materials with our friends here in person along with our live stream events. And we're just a few days away from doing this yet again.
23 years, is that right?
This is correct. That's
23.
That's slightly older than some of our first year students.
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow.
So 23 years of gathering for this teaching and learning and collegiality in church music, sacred music, and pastoral care. What are some of the topics that you've covered in the previous institutes?
Yeah, it has really covered a very, very wide range of topics, things that are, very practical, such as matters pertaining to weddings and funerals. When Lutheran Service Book was introduced in 2006, we had a conference devoted to what was new and what was old in that. We like to pick up, especially when there's anniversaries that are very useful for us. Like in 2007, that was a anniversary of Paul Gerhardt's birth, and so there was a lot of focus on Gerhardt's writings and hymnody. In all of these things, we like to present sort of a mixture of history and theology, maybe a lot of background on something, but also making things very practical, so people could say, well, what does this have to do with my congregation? How can I use this information and take something home to my people and use it there for my purposes?
What makes this so unique for you to be able to bring church musicians and other people in the church? Like this isn't just for church musicians to learn about church music. What makes that so unique to be able to bring people together from different backgrounds in the church to be learning the same things about how to implement these things in their churches?
Yeah, that is really a very unique thing about this conference, as opposed to, there's all sorts of conferences you can go to, and there's all sorts of music conferences you can go to, and you should go to in addition to ours. But the fact that we're Concordia Theological Seminary, and we teach pastors and future deaconesses. About half of our attendees are pastors. About half of our attendees to this conference are church musicians and or other church leaders, board of elders. Sometimes we have some altar guild people or other interested laity from a congregation that will show up. And so I think that's the first unique thing is that we highlight and encourage this partnership between pastor, church musician, and other people within the congregation. I mean, we all sing the church's song, sometimes in different ways, but that song of the church is what we have in common and binds us together in many ways. So I think that is a very unique focus, even among all the things that we do here at Concordia Theological Seminary. We have lots of conferences, and we have a big conference, for instance, in January, our theological symposia, and that's for almost all pastors, and that's rightly so for our institution. And then we'll have some other conferences that focus. For instance, this past weekend we had a bunch of college students here that might be considering coming to the seminary for a deaconess study or a pastoral study. But this is something that really combines the best of everything in the church, and all under the umbrella of how we confess and especially sing the church's theology in our music and liturgy, and providing resources to help us do that even better.
What happens when okay, let me reframe my question here. It's in the back of my mind now, trying to put it into words.
Right.
The collegiality, the interaction that happens at this conference among church musicians, pastors, laity. Why is that so important? What happens when we don't have that interaction among church musicians and pastors and other leaders in the congregation?
Yeah, well, just think about, a couple of years ago when none of us had very much interaction with anybody, and we see the results of that. I mean, we're not wired to just operate totally by ourselves, and especially in the church. We use that phrase a lot about our life together in the synod, our life together in the greater Christendom. Even the word synod means to walk together, and this provides a way for us to do that. And I think particularly when we're focused on, well, how are we singing? Or how is our singing? And what shall we sing? Those are very important questions that both pastors, church musicians, and other people within a congregation should be asking of each other as they continue to evaluate, how are we doing this? And, are there other things that we could do? Are there other things, for instance, even within, the church's hymnal that we've ignored or we've passed over and haven't paid attention to? That's one of the reasons why I think we have in some ways a following of people we have some people who are quote unquote groupies who come very often. We have a lot of people who come just for the first time ever, but one of the reasons that some people keep coming back is they say, when I'm doing all the planning, or either as a pastor, as a church musician, sometimes I don't get a chance to just sit and be fed by the preaching, by the music, by the singing. And so that's why the whole conference is filled with worship and music opportunities. And I think that is one of the attractions. That's the wrong word. Let me say that a different. That is one of the things that people enjoy the most, to be able to come, who are often doing this work in their own places day in and day out, that now they can come and receive and sit and listen and be refreshed by that.
What difference does that make then for these pastors and church musicians when they're able to maybe take a step back and, breathe while they're taking all of this in, this work that they're normally doing? What difference does that make for them when they're able to go back to their parishes and serve their own people?
Well, we hope that this provides a lot of ideas. Everything that we do in these few days won't exactly be applicable to every particular situation. Like, for instance, we have a wonderful artist coming in, Dr. Jonathan Rudy from Clarksville, Tennessee, giving a magnificent organ recital. Our Schola Cantorum is singing a wonderful Schutz piece on Sunday night for our choral vespers. We're doing a hymn festival on Monday night. Some of those things can't be replicated in a particular location. They may not have the resources, they may not have, the personnel to do exactly that. But perhaps they could say, well, what if we did something like this that we could do or adapt it for our congregation? Or some of the things that we'll do in daily chapel, or even at that choral vespers service, or even at that organ recital, they might say, well, this part right here, that gave us an idea of, I never even considered that we could use this musical setting of the Nunc Dimittis, for instance, or we could have a soloist sing this part of a psalm. That's something we could do. Or maybe an insight from our plenary speakers that are speaking about various topics this year that might remind them of something that could be useful, but for their own study, for their own practice at their parish. I think anytime you go to a conference, I always say, if there's one or two things you can go home with, that was worth it. And even if it was that I got to sit and be fed and didn't have to make all the decisions myself, I think that's well worth anybody's attendance at a conference such as this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We're talking about the Good Shepherd Institute with Kantor Kevin Hildebrand from Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne. We have more to talk about right after this break. You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Sarah Gulseth.
I'm Andy Bates.
At Concordia University, Wisconsin, we believe you were created for a reason: to use your God-given gifts to help others, to live a life of self-sacrifice in a me-first world, to live a life that's uncommon. Whether you're taking one of 50-plus online programs or learning with us in person on the shores of Lake Michigan, you'll be equipped to make an uncommon impact. Learn more at ctsfw.edu. Concordia University, Wisconsin. Live uncommon.
Welcome back to the Coffee Hour. I'm Sarah Gulseth.
I'm Andy Bates.
We're talking about the Good Shepherd Institute happening this weekend at Concordia Theological Seminary with Kantor Kevin Hildebrand. And before we went to break, we were talking about the wonderful respite spiritual care that these church leaders have when they come to this event and are able to kind of rest in the liturgy and the music that maybe they're generally in charge of. And now they get to be on the other side of that and fed with all of those good gifts of God and during this event. And you mentioned a few things that will be happening that I want to dig into in just a second, including the hymn festival. I need to know more about this. But it's something that I think people in the pews may not always think about when service planning is happening, how pastors and church musicians maybe come at the service planning from two different ways. Could you maybe explain how it's, I guess this is a two-part question, how would that different approach of service planning from a pastor and a church musician perspective, and then how they can all kind of come together here and be together in this learning experience?
I think it's probably two sides of the same coin. And in fact, this is a very timely question because we're talking about this very topic in one of our liturgics classes here with our seminary students this week. And both pastors and church musicians have a similar goal in doing that. They want the word to be proclaimed, whether from the chancel in the church or from the choir loft, or from wherever the musicians are located, that proclamation is to be unified. And a good pastor and church musician partnership will have that goal in mind. And the difference, I suppose, is how each one of those in their vocations has different things to consider. The pastor obviously has to or should prepare well for his sermon and bring out the themes that the gospel for that Sunday has to say, and also working with the church musician in planning, well, what are the hymns we're going to sing today? Even backing up and deciding, well, for this season of the church year, we're going to use this musical setting of the divine service, or we're going to use this particular proverb, or we might use this alternate setting of the Gloria in Excelsis, or we're singing this time of the church year, we'll start singing This is the Feast, or I guess to implement all the richness and variety that's inherent within the church's liturgy. That's part of the goal of the pastor and church musician, to even remind each other, oh, what if we did this? And sometimes the church musician has to defer to the pastor and say, well, what would be the implications of doing this, and what's part of your experience with that? Oftentimes, we'll encourage our pastoral students to seek out their church musicians and say, help me know what our congregation knows. It's hard, do we know this hymn yet? Do we know this song? What works well? How can we teach this so we can enrich and add to our expression of singing the church's song here in our congregation? When a pastor and church musician are working in tandem that way, then the whole congregation is blessed.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that each year it's covered a different theme. What is the theme this year? What are we going to be focusing on at this year's Good Shepherd Institute?
Well, the theme Bible verse that we have sort of as an overarching theme is Psalm 100, verse 5. The steadfast love of the Lord endures forever, his faithfulness to all generations. And that sort of serves as a umbrella for many and various anniversaries that we're looking at here in 2022. First, we have the 175th anniversary of the founding of the Lutheran Church in Missouri Synod in 1847. And with that, also the first hymnal of the LCMS, compiled by CFW author, published first in 1847, is in tandem with that anniversary. When Dr. Paul Grimm, my colleague, and I sat down to brainstorm different anniversaries that we might look at, other things such as, it's the 60th anniversary of the Second Vatican Council, which in a way paved the road for some of the liturgical discussions that happened in our church body and beyond in the 60s, 70s, 80s, which led into some of the hymnal projects, such as Lutheran Worship 1982. That was published 40 years ago. And so we're having a plenary session that talks about, what we learned from that process. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention some of the wonderful friends and scholars that are speaking about that. Dr. John Vieker, there in your backyard, is our scholar on hymnals in America. And so he's speaking about the impact of the founding of the Synod and Walther's first hymnal in 1847. We've got Dr. Thomas Winger from our sister seminary in Canada that's speaking about the impact of Vatican II on Lutherans in America. Now retired Pastor Bill Swirla is talking about the publication and the impact and lessons learned from Lutheran Worship 1982. And then the person who gets the last word is always a very powerful person at any conference, and that's the Pastor Harold Sankbeil, the retired director of Doxology Center for Spiritual Care and Counsel, and Pastor Sankbeil has a wonderful perspective of sort of summarizing, this is where we are because of where we've come from, and that guides us for where we're going. And he's speaking specifically about pastoral care and how Christians learn from this. He's even, entitling his topic called Seelsorge, the German word, which means the care of souls. And so he gets the last word, and he'll do a magnificent job with that.
That lineup sounds amazing. I think I need to be making a trip to Fort Wayne
Come on
this weekend.
over.
Now, you mentioned some of the other things that are happening in the schedule. What are some of those other things, specifically the hymn festival? I'm curious if that's based on something. How do those fit into these plenary and other sessions that will be happening?
Yeah, well, a number of years ago, we just made a regular practice of Monday night. We have a hymn festival, and a hymn festival is really a great way of taking. We usually sing about 8 to 10 hymns with some spoken commentary in between sets of hymns. And again, Pastor Sankbile is providing those words for us that in a way sort of set the table for what we're about to sing, taking words or phrases from those hymns to draw our attention to that. And then maybe even more than how we might sing a hymn on a Sunday morning, we're taking some specifically composed settings, most of them by either myself or my colleague Matthew Mockamer, composed for instruments, our seminary cantori, which serves as a choir, as well as the congregation, all singing in alternation, different stanzas of these hymns. And someone once described, the singing a hymn in this manner is like going to an art museum and walking past a painting that you've seen many, many times. And then one of the docents points out in that painting, did you ever notice what the artist did here? And then you can't unsee this factor in the painting that you've walked past your whole life. And sometimes a hymn festival is like that. We may take a hymn that's very, very familiar. We know and love and continue to do that. But then how the commentary brings out a word or phrase of that hymn, or something that the music is doing, a text painting example that might happen in a particular stanza, or how the choir is singing on that particular stanza. It allows us to experience and sing a hymn in a different way than perhaps we have before. And so that's it. I always say it's one of the best ways to spend an evening with the church's song, and especially in a great space like Kramer Chapel at Concordia Theological Seminary.
We've talked about church musicians, pastors, laity. What about the pastor who is not a musician? How might this be useful? What would a pastor who's not a musician learn at the Good Shepherd Institute?
Yeah, that's my favorite category. They start out as seminary students who say, I'm not one of those musicians. And those are my favorite students because, well, part of the truth is, all right, well, this doesn't mean then that you're sort of recused from thinking about musical things. It's sort of like if we flipped the tables, and if a church musician said, well, I'm not one of those theologians, therefore I don't think in theological terms. I mean, everyone would be, that would be a negative thing. And any church musician has to be thinking about theological things. And so I think putting the best construction on things, there might be a pastor who say, well, that's not my, pardon the pun, forte, but he still needs to be taking that, making that a priority. And maybe how he does that is says, okay, I don't know an F sharp from a B flat, and that's okay, but I know someone who does. My staff of church musicians, or the good people in the choir here, or the people in my instrumental ensemble, and they're going to be my advisors on this, and I'm going to go to them. Help me know how this hymn goes. How does this song go? What do you know? How can I help you? And just like our whatever we're doing, the learning never stops. The way that church music and theology go hand in hand. I mean, this is something that Luther championed, and the church continues to champion and uphold. And a conference like this continues to underscore that. They are partners. They are, Luther said, music is next to theology, meaning they're partners. And so the pastor who might think, that's not my specialty, well, maybe can get perhaps a new appreciation for the necessity of the church must sing and why the church does that. And I would say, especially maybe those pastors who may think that way, come and see the apostolic admonition. Come and see and come and listen, and we'll assist you in your calling too.
So for those who now want to go and see, even though it's coming up quickly, how can people find out more information? Maybe learning some more to attend the conference this year?
Sure. Well, at our website, www.ctsfw.edu/GSI for Good Shepherd Institute has everything you need to know about our conference. And there's also links there for our daily chapel and other live streaming links where our major events in Kramer Chapel, such as the organ recital on Sunday afternoon by Dr. Jonathan Rudy, the Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Choral Vespers, where the Schola Cantorum is singing a piece written for a Christian funeral, written by Heinrich Schutz, called the Musikalische Exequien. It's really a great example of funeral music and helping us think about Christian funerals. And then we'll also be live streaming our hymn festival and all our other events that are in Kramer Chapel. And that website can help you be directed to the right place.
Fantastic. So even people who aren't in Fort Wayne this weekend or can't make that trip can still participate in some of those musical events, which sounds like a fantastic opportunity. Kantor Kevin Hildebrand, Kantor of Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Glad to be with you.
You've been listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Sarah Gulseth.
I'm Andy Bates.
The Coffee Hour with Andy and Sarah is a production of KFUO. To support the Coffee Hour and KFUO Radio, visit kfuo.org. You can also text KFUO to 41444 or send an email to gifts@kfuo.org. And you can call us at 800-844-0524. KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere.